Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today. We are here today to ask Secretary Husted to stop implementation of House Bill 224 and to rescind his order that cuts off early voting this Friday. Early voting must continue through Monday, November 7th, the day before Election Day. That is what the law requires, and that is what will ensure that all voters, including our military voters, are not denied their opportunity to vote. We have been in communication with the Secretary's office these last several weeks, but we have not been able to come to an agreement. To prevent further voter confusion and the risk of litigation over this matter, we are asking one more time. When House Bill 224 left the General Assembly, it was a good bill intended to improve voting for military and overseas voters. Unfortunately, the bill has been rewritten to contain meanings that this body never contemplated. Last month, the Secretary of State sought advice from the Attorney General on how to implement House Bill 224 if House Bill 194 were put to referendum by the voters. The Secretary wrote to legislative leaders of both parties asking the legislature to act in order to clear up the confusion and the unreadable laws that would result from applying the Attorney General's advice. The Secretary was specifically concerned with the confusion that would result about the end of early voting and about the counting of ballots. The Secretary of State's office has now taken the position that House Bill 224 is clear and must be implemented. But stripping the words of House Bill 194 out of House Bill 224 makes the bill incomprehensible and leaves no language to implement. Therefore, House Bill 224 must be found invalid and unenforceable. If we sit by while executive office holders make the law, we are failing in our duty as lawmakers and setting a dangerous precedent with respect to the separation of powers between the branches of government. Implementation of House Bill 224, the way the Secretary's office views it, will have many bizarre and damaging effects. First, it will thwart the House Bill 194 referendum. House Bill 194, the first elections bill to be passed this year, ended early voting on Friday at 6 p.m. The voters did not like that, and hundreds of thousands of them signed petitions to repeal that bill. But now, the Secretary of State says a technical amendment to House Bill 224 also requires early voting to end on Friday at 6 p.m. This frustrates the people's right to referendum. If we could simply reenact whatever provisions the people want to repeal, why have the referendum option in our Constitution at all? This does not pass the smell test. Second, it is the equal protection violation that will occur if early voting ends on Friday. One of the most important problems with Secretary Husted's reading of House Bill 224 is that it violates the United States Constitution's guarantee of equal protection under the laws. Secretary Husted's advisory says early voting must end on Friday for non-military voters only, and that military voters shall be permitted to vote early through Monday, November 7th. Neither House Bill 194 nor House Bill 224 intended to create two different end dates for early voting. Reasonable accommodations for military and overseas voters can and should be made. However, for purposes of in-person early voting, both military and non-military voters are identically situated, and treating them differently in this circumstance violates the guarantee of equal protection of our laws. In addition, no guidance has been given by Secretary Husted's office to our local boards of elections as to how they should determine who is permitted to vote early after Friday. Will members of our military have to show special ID? Again, there is no guidance, and depending on which county website you look at, you will find very conflicting information. This could jeopardize the voting rights of military voters that attempt to vote on those days. When I researched what county boards of election websites say about early voting, I found different information on each of the 10 sites I checked, and no clear information on the Secretary of State's own website. One county site prominently displays Monday, November 7th as the last day for early voting in person. One county site says that provisional and military voters may vote on Saturday, November 5th and Monday, November 7th. I saw no other counties in my informal survey which specified provisional voting could take place on these days. Many counties, such as Medina County's site, say that early voting ends on Friday, November 4th, with no mention at all that military voters may vote early through November 7th. One county had a link that said election calendar, which takes you to the Secretary of State's own website, which says the following: November 7th, absentee ballots may be voted in person at boards of elections until close of regular business hours. Another county linked to another part of the Secretary of State's own website, which says, quote, to receive your absentee ballot in person, you may go to your county board of elections office during regular business hours, but no later than the day before the election. Nowhere in either of these two areas of the Secretary of State's own website does it say that early voting ends on November 4th, or that a different end date applies to military voters. One county declares that early voting ends Friday, November 4th, and, quote, the only exception will be for uniformed and overseas voters. See Ohio Revised Code section 3511.10. But even if one were to try to read that code section, Ohio's online code is not updated with any House Bill 224 changes. In fact, I know of no place where the election law that Secretary Husted is following is published. The third bizarre and damaging effect we will experience is that new language will confuse the provisional ballot counting process. This really highlights just what a mess House Bill 224 has become. The approach of Secretary Husted's office would add gibberish to an important and often disputed part of the law. The provisional ballot counting section would have two new requirements for counting a provisional ballot. One, the last four digits of the, and two, an, A-N. This language obviously makes no sense and wasn't passed into law by our General Assembly. Fourth, the most absurd result of trying to implement House Bill 224 is the creation of a new reason to throw out perfectly good ballots. The bill, as rewritten by Secretary Husted in accordance with the Attorney General's advice, would require that absentee ballots be thrown out if the voter puts his or her printed name on the ballot envelope, along with the signature and other required identifying information. You heard me correctly. Printing your name on the envelope would get your ballot thrown out. Clearly, House Bill 224 did not leave our chambers with such an absurd requirement. It runs contrary to the intention of the entire bill. Another absurdity, notices to the public about voter registration would be required to say, voters who do not provide one of these documents will still be able to vote the last four digits by casting a provisional ballot. Again, this doesn't make any sense and will confuse our voters. This is no way to treat the public we are charged with serving. House Bill 224 is obviously not clear on many points, yet it is being treated as a clear statement of our intention by the Secretary of State's office. We seek the following two fixes to these problems. First, Secretary Husted should not attempt to implement House Bill 224. He should immediately rescind Advisory 2011-7 and immediately notify local boards of elections that they are to remain open for early voting through Monday, November 7th. He has the power to do this. Second, the legislature should pass a bill that clears up all of this confusion. A new bill is the only way to protect military voters, and is the only way to remove any appearance that the legislature or any executive office is trying to thwart the referendum of House Bill 194. It is our duty as lawmakers to write laws that express our intentions in plain language on which the public and other branches of government can rely. I am introducing a bill to provide that plain language. All of the Democratic members of the State Government and Elections Committee have signed on to it, and I will urge my colleagues in the majority to pass it quickly. In the meantime, Secretary Husted should act to prevent statewide voter confusion and to protect the voting rights and opportunities of all Ohioans.